Hi, my name is Sarah Arter. It's August 21st, and we are here today with Ed Krolak. This is for the Illinois Veterans History Project in partnership with Project Next Generation at the LaSalle Public Library. Thanks for joining us, Ed. And to start off, questions, when were you born? Where?
Oh, well, you're living 2 blocks from the house I grew up in, if I ever grew up. This is 1927 Pulaski, and my family home was 1734 on the other side of the street. And I was born the year Franklin Roosevelt was elected president the first time. It was 1932. And I've most of my life when I wasn't otherwise occupied has been here in Peru. Most of it here on Pulaski Street. Had a couple of years when Pat and I were married. Our first apartment was down on 4th Street in that lovely red brick house up the hill from the Patak Funeral Home. It was owned by Judge Massian, but the owner now is Wally Zukowski, the lawyer who was my student in the junior college. And I went to St. Valentine's School down here, and I went to St. Bede Academy to high school. I graduated in the class of 1950. Then I went to Loras College in Dubuque, Iowa, and graduated in 1954 with a bachelor's degree in English, with honors, if you please. Now, by the time I was out of high school, I was subject to the draft. The selective service system at that time, World War I, World War II had finished, and of course the draft was very active there. But they kept in the military at full strength by retaining the draft. Now, in 1950, when I graduated from high school, I was 18, and I had to register for the draft. Well, at that time, things weren't so critical. There was no active war, and an article in the Selective Service Act said that if you started to go to college and you kept your grades up and your nose clean, you might be excused from induction into the service if you were eligible, and that's what happened to me. Sometime after I graduated from high school, I went to Chicago to took I think it was called the Armed Forces Qualification Test. Well, I did pretty well on that, so they said, okay, you can go to college. When we were in college, we used to tease each other about ending up in Korea. The Korean War started in June of 1950. I graduated from St. Bede in 1950 in May, early June. So that tightened things up a little bit, and a lot of my classmates who did not go to college ended up in the service. Well, after college, I didn't have a job, and I started applying around, and I had a meeting with the principal of what is now Putnam County High School. It was Hopkins High School in Granville. And I was over there, and we had a nice session, just the two of us. But then he asked me the question, "Are you eligible for the draft?" Well, I wasn't going to lie, because if I'd have lied, he'd have fired me. And if I'd have evaded the draft, I'd have ended up in prison. So I said, yes, I'm eligible for the draft. Well, that ended my prospects there. Now, that was 1954. Okay. Well, I started teaching in Lawston in 1954, eligible for the draft at the whole time, but not called. Now I got the job because a fellow who's still around, Ed Tomaszewski, was an 8th grade teacher in the Mendota grade schools, and he lived 2 doors from me, just around the corner on 12th and Pulaski, and he was 5 years ahead of me in school. And at that time, he was teaching the 8th grade in the Lawston grade school, and the superintendent of both the grade school and the high school was the same fella. And one of the English teachers had left Lawston rather late in the school year, and they hadn't replaced her. Well, shortly before school started, Ed told Mr. Graber that there was a fella in the neighborhood who was fresh out of college, who had a degree in English, and gave every indication that he knew how to read and write. Well, perhaps Mr. Graber was trapped, but he hired me. So I stayed at Lawston for 2 years. Now, in September or October of the first year that I taught at Lawston, I was called up for a pre-induction physical. That was the first step in getting into the military. They decided whether you were physically fit to get in. So I went to Chicago, had the physical exam. They told me, don't have any, if you get drafted, don't have any notions about going to officer candidate school, because you have what is called a C profile on the physical, and you have to have a better one if you want to be an officer. Well, all right, that's what it is. So now, so I was classified 1A, that was the, and I was eligible to be called at any time. Well, the Korean War had wound down, and the draft was still in effect, but it was a little slower until 1955. In September or October of 1955, I was told that I would be inducted into the service in December. That was the end of the first semester at Lawston High School. Now, evidently, Mr. Graber was pretty familiar with the draft board, because he went over there to Ottawa and he said, you know, I need this guy, because I have a hole in the English department that he's filling, and could you delay his induction? Well, they bought it. So I was retained at Augusta until the second semester of the 55-56 school year. But I had no sooner finished that than the notice came. You're going into the Army on June 28th, 1956. Well, I had 2 years teaching experience, and I went. And we ended up in Chicago for the induction stuff, PreInduction Physical. And I was assigned to a basic training unit at Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri, which is about 120 miles west of St. Louis. And got a train ride, courtesy of Uncle Sam, stopped somewhere outside the Army post on a railroad siding that for all the world looked like a big farmyard, tracks and all that. Well, we loaded up and we got up to Fort Leonard Wood, and I got assigned to a basic training company. Now there's an interesting coincidence here. With that, I entered the service through Chicago with a group of fellows who were local, and one of them was a fellow from Ottawa named Jack Stortz. And as the future played out, Stortz and I were inducted into the Army on the same day, took basic training in the same company, I believe, although he was in a different barracks from mine. And when we finished our basic, we were both assigned to Fort Gordon, Georgia, for additional training in the U.S. Signal Corps, the Southeastern Signal School. Well, by then Jack and I were familiar with one another, and we went down there, and it turned out that we were assigned originally to the temporary place where the young soldiers would go prior to being placed in their destination at the post. Now I forget where Jack was assigned, but there was a marvelous coincidence. The headquarters company was the company that all the people who worked in the offices in the military were assigned to the headquarters company. Now the headquarters company clerk, hi, I'm having an interview about Army. You can listen if you want to. The Cubs are down 2-0 in the last half of the first. So the company clerk at the headquarters company was a fraternity brother of Stortz's at Bradley University. Well, that opened a couple of doors for us. He was familiar with all the guys who worked in offices, checked our 1040s, our military forms, and assigned us to where we were supposed to go on the base. Except there was a fellow named Bob Locker, whose job at the enlisted personnel branch was to sort out those 1040s. Now, I don't know how much Stortz's fraternity brother knew about me, but I think he knew that I was with Jack. So, as they begun, he said, you don't want to go to school here, to a regular place. This headquarters company is nice duty, and if we play it right, I can get you into headquarters company here for an MOS, that's a military occupational specialty, that you would learn on the job, OJT, on the job training, then you would be permanently here. Well, Locker went through the Form 20s, and he picked out Stortz. And he was going through, and then he ran across mine. And he told me later, he said, I saw your 1040, and I said, hey, this kid went to a Catholic college. And so did I. It wasn't the same one. And the clerk told me he and Stortz were buddies, so I got pulled out too. So Stortz and I ended up living for 8 weeks in what was called a student company. Now those students were going to various Signal Corps specialties, but we were assigned as on-the-job trainees at the curriculum branch of the Southeastern Signal School. Now that was the office where the office plans, the course plans for 26 different signal courses were checked and edited and refined by the people there. Well, Stortz got the job editing lesson plans, and I got a job as an assistant to the civilian student secretary, to the civilian secretary of the curriculum branch. Her name was Margie Gay. So I was working for her, and Stortz was doing his work with the guys, civilians, who were checking the lesson plans. Well, that worked out pretty fine. Mm-hmm. Now, one of the strangest incidents in the beginning, is this too long? One of the strangest incidents in the beginning was that the non-commissioned people in our office was comprised of about 30 civilians, men and women, the women mostly in a typing pool. And there were 4 or 5 military privates and PFCs working in the branch too. But when we got there, we were told that one of our responsibilities would be to serve as a Jeep driver occasionally, to take stuff from our office around other places on the camp where it needed to go. Well, obviously you have to learn how to drive military way, right? So they sent us to driving school in the military for about 3 or 4 days, maybe a week. And that's where the going really got going. There were 50 of us probably from all over the camp attending military driving school for the first day. The first thing they did was they gave us a test. It was a multiple choice objective type test on rules of the road and how to behave in a car and all that sort of thing. So we took that test. After we took the test, which was easily scored by machine, the sergeant came back to the big room like an auditorium where we were. And I put my hand up. And he said, "You got a question?" I said, "Yes, Sarge." I said, "What do you do if you got somebody in here who has to learn how to drive from the beginning? Because I don't know how." He said, "What?" I said, "That's the truth. I have never learned how to drive. My parents never owned a car. We had easy transportation on buses in our little town, and I just never got to learn how to drive a car." And then he said, "What's your name?" So I told him my name was visible. Your name is across the front of your fatigue jacket, Krolak, Krolak. And he went, Krolak, and he went through those test papers. And he said, "Wait a minute, you don't know how to drive." I said, "No, I really don't." He said, "How is it that you and this other guy," and he pointed to Stortons, "you and this other guy got the highest score on this test?" Well, I said, "Well, Sarge, I'm good at tests. I just happens to be one of my skills, and if you have any more, I'd be glad to take them." He said, "Oh no, this will be quite enough." So we both went to the driver's school on the outback of the camp and to learn how to drive. Well, we started the next day, and when we got there, one of the instructors who was assigned to me said, "This thing here says that you have never had a civilian driver's license." I says, "That's right." He said, "You mean I'm going to have to teach you how to drive from scratch?" And I said, "Somebody is, because I don't know how." Well, the lessons weren't, we started with the smallest vehicle in the Army group, the Jeep. And I learned how to make the thing go forward, and I could start and stop it. But because I had no experience, by the time the course ended, it was about a week, I was assigned a military driver's license, restricted. Most of the guys who were with me in the course were licensed militarily all the way up the ladder from the Jeep to a 2.5-ton truck. Now those trucks are the ones with the long trailers where they move groups of soldiers from one place to another. That was, well, I got restricted to the Jeep and the little 3/4-ton truck, and that's all. Well, we go back to the camp, back to the curricula branch, and I start, and now I really ought to get a civilian driver's license, right? Well, I'll tell you how it happened. There was one of the guys in the barracks. Evidently, he had enlisted in the Army, and he was going to be there a year longer than we were. He applied for duty at a company in Germany, and he got it. Now, so he got ready to transfer to Germany, but he owned a car, a 1954 Buick. Sorry, no, not Buick, Oldsmobile. A 1954, forgive me, it's the age. It was a Mercury, two-tone, green bottom, green top, yellow bottom, 4 doors. Nice car, only 2 or 3 years old. He sold it to me for $950. Well, I had the money, saved a little money while I was teaching, and now I had to get a civilian driver's license. That meant we had to go into Augusta for that routine, and there I caught what might have been the break of the world. As I recall, I'm not sure, I guess I did drive my own car from Fort Gordon down to Augusta. But I had somebody with me, and I always drove with somebody who knew how to drive. Well, we got to the driver's license station, and they said, all right, fine. And they looked at, and they said, oh, you have a military driver's license. I said, yes. He said, well then, we won't bother with a road test. Now, I had never driven anything except that car except around the camp. So they said, now, would you like a license for 1, 2, or 5 years at $1 a year? Georgia license. Well, I had no intention of hanging around Georgia after I got out of the Army, so I took the license for 2 years, and I was then a certified driver in the state of Georgia and in the military. Well, that went pretty well. It was I was able to use that car, share it with other people. It was marvelous. Well, our time went. Now, the relationship between the people in the military, because there was nothing serious abroad in the area of why you have to be going to the Army to serve in a war. There was no war. So we were pretty easy going. The commanding officer of our base, of our office, was a captain, Captain Andrew Kaifas, and this is a little we were talking about the beginning GIs, and I and Captain Kaifas were talking about acclimating yourselves to the Army somehow, and in the discussion, I made a remark that he took exception to, because it was a sort of a minor complaint that I had about the Army. And this was one of the high points in my early. He said, what do you know about the Army? You've been in the Army for 3 months, counting basic training, and how can you say something like that? And I took a chance. I said, Captain, I'll tell you, you're right. I haven't been in the Army very long, but I have never laid an egg either. But I know more about an omelet than any chicken who ever did. And he didn't throw me into the guardhouse. So it was that kind of stuff for the whole time that we were there. Well, as I said, I knew I wasn't going overseas, and we had a very good relationship with the people in Augusta. Now, do you have a question about Augusta? Do you know what the bigger? When I found out at Fort Leonard Wood that I was going to Augusta for training, 15 weeks at least, I was overjoyed. Augusta is where the great Augusta National Golf Tournament is played. And the women pros even had a tournament a couple of weeks before the Masters. Mm-hmm. Well, I got there, and now I got there in September, October. We had to go through the dead of winter, but that wasn't too bad. The atmosphere in the barracks was rather light-hearted because there was no difficulty overseas. We had some incidents that were. We got to talking. Oh, we got to talking one time, and let's see. What do I want? Oh yeah, one of the guys in the barracks. Since there was no war, the idea was, what are we doing here? So he said, we're here, and it's like the unfit leading the unwilling to do the unnecessary. Well, that gives an easy sort of attitude. And of course, I worked with civilians. Now, I had been to college and majored in English, and quite frankly, I was good at it. But my job had only basic stuff with Margie. Stortz had a harder, Stortz had to work on those lesson plans. So I had it pretty easy. Well, there was a time when, let's see, I'm trying to bring up another situation that got crazy, and I'm having a little trouble doing it. I don't mind. I'm a little on edge, although I'll talk to you about other stuff until midnight if you want to hang around that long. I got a big mouth. Okay. Oh, now, as time went on, we had a very good relationship with the citizens of Augusta. Now, in our case, Stortz and I were both Catholics, and there aren't many Catholics in Georgia. And Augusta had, I think, two or three Catholic churches, but one of them was only for black people. We were on the border of the law that passed in 1955 that required school districts to integrate. And you'll remember in 1955, well, you don't, you were too young, but the first incident of that was in Fort Chaffee, Arkansas. And that instituted a possible riot. So they called the army in on the streets to make sure that these kids, the black kids, got into the white schools. Well, that hadn't happened in Georgia yet. And as a Catholic, they welcomed me into the parish. It was the largest parish in Augusta, and I had a fine relationship with those people. They invited us to parties and all these kinds of things. And so it was great. Well, one of the incidents, now we had our barracks was integrated, black and white soldiers. We understood that. But integration had not yet come full circle to Augusta. And I can remember about a third of the way through my time in the office, it looked like Georgia was going to have to undergo the same process that Arkansas did. And so I had there's this lovely middle-aged woman, tall, blonde typist, and I began to give her the business. I said, if they demand integration of the public schools, things could get a little hairy, and they might call us into the streets to keep order, to make sure that nobody gets hurt and the integration takes place. Now, this was a lovely woman, but she was Southern to the core and used to the way things were. And when I said, so if you see me down there on the street with a rifle, you're going to have to behave. And she looked at me and she said, never. And that's how it was. When we went into town, the white kids went to one section and the black kids went to their section, and they had a section. So but there were other things that happened in our day-to-day living at that. Now, most of the people in the headquarters company, we were in that headquarters company, most of them had office jobs which required educational skills. So a great many of my colleagues were college graduates. And we were allowed to dress in civilian clothes after office hours, but we marched into parades and all this. But there was one incident involving one of the black students that we referred to as the Ashlock Miracle. Ashlock was a small, short, bright African American from Virginia, and he was in our company, and he had a job. Well, in the morning, we used to fall out for inspection to see if anybody had skipped overnight, you know. And we did. Well, on this one morning, one of our colleagues, Ron Ackerman from Michigan, he had to go to the latrine before we went out for the morning lineup. And now the barracks were long and narrow and beds all up and down. Ashlock's bed was the nearest one to the latrine. And Ackerman went to the latrine, he came out, and he looked at the bed, and the lump on the bed suggested that Ashlock was still sleeping. And if he was in trouble. So we were all formed up. Ackerman came out, took his place, and Ashlock was already there. Now, how did he get there, if in fact he was asleep? Well, nobody knew, so we referred to that as the Ashlock Miracle. Now, in a group that has similar interests, it eases the temperature and the pressure considerably. So, that was the atmosphere for the whole time we were at Fort Gordon. And we, as I said, we got treated royally by the citizens in Augusta. And in fact, we even belonged to a little Catholic social group. It was great, you know. Well, when we left, Stortz and I left on the same day, June 27th, 1958, and we drove back to LaSalle in my Mercury, split the driving, didn't even stop overnight, and there it is. A couple of weeks after I got back home, I had applied for a job at LP while I was in the service. And lo and behold, I got a call. Would you come for an interview? Sure enough, an English teacher had left LP. She was also the yearbook advisor. Well, I was being interviewed by the longtime superintendent at LP, Phil Dolan, lived in LaSalle, and he was impressed with my transcripts, and he said, now you know, he said, the Board of Education considers any teacher with less than a master's degree as a substandard teacher. Now that was the clue that if I was going to get a job there and wanted to hang around, I had to get a master's degree. Well, I did, and I stayed. And from there, the junior college broke off, and they had the junior college at that time was operated by the high school in the high school buildings. Well, when the new district was formed and the college went across the river where it is now, a lot of the first faculty at that college came from LP. In fact, this sort of, there were guys at LP who ended up in the junior college before I did. And I had, well, jealous that's a horrible word, but I just, and when the time came, I got over there and stayed for 25 years, retired in 1994, and that's the end of the story. Now, what else would you like to know?
It's fantastic. Is there anything?
Oh, yes, I can tell you.
Oh, please.
Please. Now I was a greenhorn. You know, I wasn't strong physically, and but I had to undergo. This was in basic training at Fort Leonard Wood. I had to undergo the regular basic training, and there were a couple of good incidents in that area. One of them occurred on the rifle range. We were being instructed in how to shoot accurately so that if you ever got into combat, you could kill somebody. And when they told me that the way you really want to make sure that you kill a guy is to aim for his belt buckle. That was just in the thing. Well, I didn't know what I was going to do. Well, my first performance on the rifle range was not too good. Now, the rifle that we had, the U.S. Army caliber 30 M1, that's out of use now, had two sights on it. There was a sight at the end of the barrel, and a sight at the breech where the ammunition was put into the gun, and that was controlled by a little wheel that you turned, so that you could. The idea was to match the vision from the rear sight to the front sight, then you could shoot. Well, I was shooting and I wasn't doing too well, and the young lieutenant, who was probably not much older than I was, if he was any, he had been to college and he went to OCS, so he got it. He said, you know, I think you have to lower that sight a couple of clicks. And as you moved the little wheel, it went click, click, click. I said, okay, so I'll move it. I said, Lieutenant, I said, something's wrong. He said, oh? I said, yeah, when I move the lever, I'm not getting any clicks. I'm just getting a kind of a grinding sound. He said, let me see that weapon. So I looked, and he said, sure enough, the sight on this weapon is no good. So my first weapon in the Army had to be replaced by one that worked, as it were. But the best incident is when we got a little more advanced training, and we were on. We got to train on the high-powered machine gun courses, the 30 caliber machine gun. Now that was a two-man operation. You shot it from the prone position at the target downrange, and one of your buddies would feed the ammunition into the breech. You know, you've probably seen a picture of that. And well, I had the kid who was probably the best soldier in the whole outfit helping me put the bullets in the gun. But I guess he was doing his job fine, but I wasn't having much luck with the target. The drill sergeant, his name was Roy Wetherill. I will never forget his name. He came up behind me and he said, "I've been watching you." And he said, "And I want to tell you that I've seen you fire that weapon. But I know myself that I would not be afraid to stand out there at 200 yards all day and let you shoot at me with that thing." Well, I was insulted. Well, what could I say? Well, as it turned out, at the end of the basic training, when they had the big, almost competition between the various companies in the battalion, we went through all the stuff. I was informed that I wouldn't do too good with that kind of Army stuff, so on the day of the test, I had to stay behind, and I got KP, kitchen police, which was, well, you know, I was still there, and when we went to meals in the dining hall, they had a bar outside the door where you lined up, and when you got in, you were supposed to chin yourself 3 times. Well, I didn't have much luck with that. But I got to eat, but I used to hang there like a piece of meat.
Mm-hmm.
So, but there it is. I mean, it was embarrassing, but all was okay. When I came back, I was home 2 weeks, and a little trouble started in Egypt. President Eisenhower was the president at the time, and it began to look like they were going to have to send some people down there to straighten that out. Now, the idea was you could be called back, and the most recent guys out would have been the first guys called back.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it never got to me, and I want to tell you, I was not amused. That's how, when I got the job at LP, during that time when I was hanging, are they going to call me back or not? Well, they didn't. And the rest, as they say, is history.
That's wonderful.
Now, if there's anything I haven't covered that you're curious about.
I guess just a question about joining the military in general. A message for future generations considering military.
Oh, yes. Well, there is no draft now. I don't know. Apparently, the military forces are not at their full complement, but enlistees only are, are taken. Now right now, the condition, spiritually, if you will, in this country is not good. The president canceled the big parade, which would show the world how tough we were. And some of the people weren't. Well, that's what they do in other countries. Well, it's okay. So, if you go into the service now, you will have to enlist. And if you enlist, you can volunteer for certain kinds of training. And you will get the training, and if you are not generally prepared for a good job, you can be made ready for a good job by military training. Now you have to live the way you have to live, which is, well, it's okay. But that's just the way it is. Now, I wonder, this is speculation, what would happen if, in an effort to strengthen the military forces, they reinstated the draft?
People have talked about it.
So all the kids in high school, boy, when I get out, I gotta go. I guess you still have to register at the age of 18, but so there is as time goes on, oversupply. But I don't expect they will reinstate the draft anytime soon, unless all hell breaks loose somewhere in the world and we really get into another mess. But you have a certain degree of pride. You know that you're helping the country, even under the circumstances that we were. See, in fact, things in Vietnam began to get a little fishy about the time I left active service. But it was a different kind of thing. Some of the regular guys, the men who were enlisted, had volunteered for service in Indochina because life there was pretty good. You had a tent and a houseboy, and of course by into the 1960s, it got hairy, and that didn't stop until 1973. And we had, we lost local kids. I knew a couple of them. So I consider myself reasonably patriotic, but fortunate in that I did not have to undergo the full force of what it meant to be a soldier. Although I had been trained so that I never got into any trouble. I was 50% of your time, if you're like me, was spent watching your behavior, so they wouldn't. So I had no trouble with MPs, and yet, Fort Gordon was one of the programs at Fort Garten was where they trained MPs. So they were all over the place. So you had to behave. And I behaved like a model soldier. A model soldier could be looked upon as a small imitation of the real thing. But I did what I had to do. Amen. Now, is there any more that you are?
I think it's
What did you think of that? Well,
oh, it's
what I told
fantastic.
you?
It's fantastic.
Huh?
I'm gonna go back and watch it.
Yeah, the part about learning how to drive
Yeah.
at the turn of the century, between 1997 and about 2000, no, from 1997 until the mosquito bit me in 2002, I was a regular at the News Tribune. I had a column that I wrote called Senior Lifestyle. And the story of learning how to drive was one of those columns. And the people who pay attention have remembered it. And I used to write stuff about sports, and you heard the crack I made when, and it was, they remembered. Didn't you used to write for the paper? I said, oh yeah, but when the mosquito bit me, I sort of lost my edge, and I've been here for 16 years.
Mm-hmm.
But
Well, you look good.
but there it is.
Thank you so much for your time today. All right.